Welcome to the Parsha Themes Shir. It's a dual Parsha today, Vayakhel and Pekudei, and it's for the Refuah Shalema of Moshe Shimon ben Leah Esther Chaya HaLevi. A little bit on Pesach as well. So, amazing times we're living in. A nation this small should not be this strong. Israel has no oil, no vast natural resources, and a population barely the size of a mid-sized American city. It is surrounded by enemies, condemned in international forums, targeted by terror and boycotted by activists. And still it thrives in military power, medicine, agriculture, technology, and intelligence. The Jewish people were supposed to disappear a long time ago. That is how the story of persecuted minorities usually ends. Yet the Jews came home, revived their language, rebuilt their land, and turned desert into farmland. There is no rational explanation for a nation returning to its homeland after 2,000 years. Israel does not make sense unless you believe that something greater than statistics is at play. If you stare only at the numbers, you miss the narrative. Meanwhile, the enemies that promise to destroy Israel are themselves unraveling. Hamas is shattered, Hezbollah's leadership has been decimated, the Houthis are repeatedly struck, the Ayatollah regime is in the process of being disarmed. Those who vowed to erase Israel from the map are struggling simply to survive. History may look random, but redemption runs on a rhythm. The achievements are nothing short of astonishing. Recently, the United States Secretary of Defense referred to what he called the two most powerful air forces in the world, the United States and Israel. Israel consistently ranks among the 10 most powerful nations on earth in military capability and technological innovation. Let that sink in. A nation of just 9 million people stands shoulder to shoulder with America, Russia, and China in the list of the most powerful. When statistics stop making sense, the story of Hashem begins. If this is not a modern-day miracle, then what is? History books usually describe miracles after they happen. I am increasingly convinced that we are living inside one. The Jews of Purim and Hanukkah 2,400 and 2,200 years ago had no idea that their life stories would become Jewish holidays until the end of time. It seems that we are experiencing exactly the same. Nature is simply God's miracle on autopilot. This week we read Parsha Chodesh, when God commands that the month of Nisan, Pesach, becomes the first month of the Jewish calendar, even though the month of Tishri, in which Rosh Hashanah is celebrated, is the start of the new year. God runs the world in two different modes. One is the predictable order of nature, the other is the miraculous dimension that breaks the rules. Tishri represents the ordinary world of nature. Nisan represents the extraordinary world of miracles. The message is simple and profound. It is time for us to open our eyes. The miracles around us are not coincidence, and they are not proof of how brilliant or powerful we are. They are expressions, rather, of divine love. Sometimes the greatest natural act hides inside the natural order. The plagues in Egypt had an explicit purpose. They revealed that God is in full control. The Egyptian gods that people worshipped were powerless. Today our false gods have different names: politics, armies, economies, elected officials. We have learned painfully that political power can disappear overnight. Even places we once thought were safe can change in a single election. The seats of power we rely on can flip in an instant. Sadly, even places we once considered strongholds can change overnight. Recent events in New York are a painful reminder. Our prophets teach that the future redemption will mirror the redemption from Egypt. The prophet Micah says, "Kimei tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu niflos." Just like I showed you miracles in the days when you left Egypt, I will show you wonders prior to the arrival of Mashiach, the Messiah, in the final redemption, which is due. The miracles of the Exodus were meant to wake a sleeping people after centuries of slavery. Sadly, 4 out of 5 Jews refused to wake up. This time, according to some opinions at least, it will be different. No Jew will be left behind. But to do that, we need to wake them up from their spiritual slumber and help them see the light. When the Jewish people reached the Red Sea, they declared, Zeh Keli v'anvehu, this is my God and I will glorify him. Suddenly, the miracles were undeniable. When we're aware of the miracles around us, everyone else very soon gets up to speed. Perhaps that moment is approaching again. God is whispering through history, through statistics, through survival against all odds. The only question left is whether we are listening. Hashem is waiting for us to wake up, and when we do, redemption will no longer feel like a distant dream. It will feel like the next chapter of the story we are already living. Now, the value of community. The Pesach says, "Vayakil Moshe es kol adas bnei Israel," and Moshe assembled the whole assembly of the children of Israel. There is great value to kahal, in other words, community. The community is bigger than ourselves because we contribute and we're a part of it. Its potential total effect is way beyond the sum of its individual people. As an antidote to the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, where we were united in sin, and to avoid compounding the tragedy with machlokes or division, Moshe assembled all of Bnei Israel. Together they could and were obligated to build not only a mishkan, but a unified community, with intentions for great good, as opposed to the opposite, in other words, the evil of idol worship symbolized by the golden calf. Now, blending assertiveness with humility. So the artisans then fashioned the inner altar and the outer altar. These were followed by the laver and the pillars of the courtyard. Nevuv luchos asa osei. As instructed, the artisans made the outer copper altar as a hollow structure. The outer altar is where the process of refining our animal natures took place. The material and form of the outer altar allude to the two opposite attitudes we need to cultivate in order to accomplish this. On the one hand, we must be resolute in our dedication to spiritual advancement. The Jews are called a stiff-necked people. This can be a positive quality, though, when it is expressed as determination and obstinacy in realizing spiritual goals. This quality is alluded to by the fact that the altar was made of copper, since the Hebrew word for copper, nechoshes, is related to the Hebrew word for brazen, nechush, in other words, stubbornness. We are similarly taught that the high priest's forehead plate, inscribed with the words Kodesh Lashem, holy to God, atoned for the sin of arrogance. On the other hand, the hollow altar was filled with earth. Similarly, while we must be externally stubborn, internally we must be humble as earth. And we say in our prayers, "And may my soul be as dust to all." Now, the attitude towards weekday work. The Pesach says, "Sheshis yomim te'oseh melacha." 6 days work shall be done, and the 7th day shall be holy. The Torah describes the Jews' work in the course of the week as a passive endeavor. 6 days work shall be done, not 6 days you shall do work. For the Jew regards his workday endeavors not as the source of his sustenance, but merely as a vessel in which to receive God's blessing. Now, there are 3 kinds of people, and they're all essential parts of the community. Kuchu me'itchem, kol nediv libo, zahav v'chesed u'nechoshes. Take from yourselves everyone whose heart motivates him gold, silver, and copper. Gold represents the purity and perfection of the tzaddik or righteous person. Silver represents the great yearning of the Baal Teshuvah or penitent for closeness to God, a yearning many times more powerful than that of the tzaddik, because it is a yearning from afar. Kesef, the Hebrew word for silver, also means yearning. Copper, the lowliest of metals, represents the good deeds of the sinner. God's home on earth is complete only when it includes all 3. That's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In support of this, the sages teach us that any public prayer or fast from which sinners are intentionally excluded will not be effective. This is because, by virtue of their divine souls, each Jew possesses inestimable worth and is in fact full of good deeds. Each of our unique personalities plays a crucial role in the destiny of the Jewish people and the world in general. Now, the unity of the sons of Yaakov. The Torah then describes how the artisans fashioned the priestly garments, including the high priest's ephod or apron. 2 onyx stones were attached to the upper ends of the 2 shoulder straps of the ephod. V'yasu es avnei hashoham. The artisans made the onyx stones engraved with the names of Israel's, in other words, Yaakov's sons. Some of Yaakov's sons were singled out for leadership roles. Yehuda was the father of the royal line of David. Levi was the father of the priests, and Yosef was selected to lead the family after Yaakov's death. Nonetheless, the names of Yaakov's sons were inscribed on the ephod's 2 shoulder stones in the order of their birth rather than in the order of their importance or prestige. This underscores their common unifying factor, the fact that they are all Yaakov's sons and all righteous. Yaakov was the only patriarch whose children all remained faithful to the divine mission and ideology that Avram began. All of Yaakov's sons learned how to channel their individual differences and strengths toward perpetuating Judaism. This unity made their inscribed names a source of merit for us as the high priest entered the tabernacle to represent us before God. Just as parents are happy to grant their children's wishes when they all cooperate lovingly, God is more ready to shower us with his beneficence when we follow in the footsteps of Yaakov's sons and unite in our devotion to the ideals of Judaism. Now the exiles compared. There is a great disparity between the duration of the exile after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, which lasted for 70 years, and the length of the exile after the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, which is still ongoing. In grappling with this phenomenon, the Gemara in Yoma explains that during the first Beis Hamikdash they were guilty of adultery, idolatry, and murder, which are exposed and obvious sins and therefore easily rectifiable. But in the case of the second Beis Hamikdash, their primary shortcoming was baseless hatred, sinas chinam, which is by its nature concealed and obfuscated, and therefore continues to evade detection and remediation. Rav Moshe Feinstein adds that baseless hatred lingers because we have adopted it as one of the principles that we proudly tout. All too often we believe that our hatred is not baseless at all, but rather justified and righteous, and hence our failure to rectify this sin is not a behavioral flaw, but an ideological one. As we enter the month of Nisan and the season of renewal, it is an appropriate time to rethink and reassess our actions as well as our perspectives and perceptions. In that merit, may we witness the redemption and see sins cease from the land, as it says in Tehillim, in Psalms. Now the Mishkan and Hiddur mitzvah. The Mishkan is not only mentioned at the end of the Oz Yashir, the Song at the Sea, but is also referenced in the beginning. Zeh Keli V'Anvehu opens the song celebrating the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the Yamsuf. There are several interpretations of the ambiguous word V'Anvehu. The sages this is my God and I will glorify him. The sages in Gemara Shabbos interpreted it as referring to hiddur mitzvah, the beautifying of the objects used for mitzvah observance. The Targum interprets the word as relating to constructing the Mishkan. These interpretations complement one another. Hiddur mitzvah of the highest order was practiced in the construction of the Mishkan. The elaborate details that encompass the parashiyos that deal with the Mishkan help create hiddur mitzvah of the highest order, and it was thus practiced in the construction of the Mishkan. The elaborate details that encompass the parashiyos that deal with the Mishkan help to create a beautiful structure. The Mishkan and later the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, were stunning works of art, a true expression of hiddur mitzvah. Why is hiddur mitzvah so important? Why can't we simply perform mitzvahs in a way that satisfies all halachic requirements, but not necessarily in a beautiful fashion? Hiddur mitzvah is an expression of Avodas HaShem, the love of God. A gift that is presented to someone who one loves is done so with special care and attention to detail that expresses that love. When we don't want to do something, we do it in a way to simply get by. But hiddur mitzvah is one way we show our love for Hashem and the mitzvahs he has given us. Now, guidelines in Avodas HaShem. The recurrent phrase in this week's parasha, Ka'asher tzivah Hashem es Moshe, as Hashem commanded Moshe, is repeated no less than 18 times. It was done exactly the way that Hashem instructed, it says. The Beis HaLevi presents a penetrating analysis of this recurring phrase in 2 places. In Parshas Lech Lecha, he explains this phrase to indicate that even though an individual is highly intelligent and thinks that he knows the reason why Hashem commanded the mitzvah, he should perform it not because of his knowledge of the reason, but because of the divine command itself. Only this attitude is truly divine service. Performing the mitzvah because of our understanding would not be serving God, but serving ourselves by following our own understanding. A similar duality appears in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah. After the Gemara questions why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara challenges the question, why do we blow shofar? Hashem commanded us to blow. Even though Tamei and mitzvahs, the reasons for the mitzvahs, are often offered by Torah scholars as part of Torah study, the mechayiv, that which obligates us to do the mitzvah, is certainly not the reason, but rather the divine command itself. Whether one has an insight into a possible reason or not, he is equally bound by the mitzvah because of the divine commandment. In Parshas Ki Tisa, the Beis Halevi links this concept to the relationship between the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, and the building of the Mishkan. One opinion in the Midrash, followed by Rashi, states that Hashem commanded Moshe concerning the Mishkan only after the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf. Thus, the construction of the Mishkan atoned for the sin of the golden calf. The Beis Halevi explains that each mitzvah has enormous spiritual inner depth, and this is certainly so for the Mishkan and Mikdash, which houses the divine presence in some mysterious way. One knowledgeable of this depth of Torah might be tempted to utilize his knowledge to create some entity which will bring down the divine presence without following any specific divine commandment. This is what Bnei Israel attempted to do in forming the Egel. Their grievous error lay in the fact that only God determines what form of worship is appropriate and what kind of structure and vessels would be a correct form to house the Shekhinah or divine presence. Klal Yisrael, in constructing the Mishkan, atoned for their great sin by not diverging one iota from the divine command and building it because of God's command, not based on their insights into its enormous spiritual significance. Creating alternative forms of worship based on the perceived reasons for mitzvos is sinful and can even lead, as it did in the case of the Egel, to idolatry. Now the table and the Menorah. So 3 holy vessels stood in the inner sanctuary of the Mishkan. The shulchan or table and the Menorah, the candelabra, stood opposite one another, and the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar, was situated in between them. These vessels represent different aspects of Avodas HaShem, the service of God, and by understanding their significance we can improve our Avodas HaShem. We recite in Kriyas Shema, V'lo sasura achrei levavechem v'achrei einechem. Do not stray after your heart and after your eyes. The sages interpret this verse to be referring to 2 challenges that we encounter. Straying after one's heart means accepting heretical ideas, whereas following one's eyes refers to pursuing prohibited physical pleasures. These 2 distinct types of temptation stem from the dual nature of man. Man is a physical being with desires similar to animals, yet man has the ability to think creatively. At the moment of his creation, man is referred to as Ofar min ha'adama, dust from the earth, like all animals. Yet he alone is granted the divine breath of life, thereby becoming nefesh chaya, a thinking and speaking being. Man can stray from his creator by misusing either of these gifts, whether it be his becoming so involved in the physical world that he pursues only his animalistic drives, or by him misguidedly using the gift of intellect. In the latter case, instead of man using his thought process to understand divine wisdom, he intellectually denies the existence of his creator altogether. The Shulchan and the Menorah represent the 2 aspects of man's existence. The Shulchan holds bread, symbolic of earthly needs and pursuits. The Menorah provides light, representative of the intellectual and spiritual side of our existence. As we look at the Shulchan and the Menorah, we are reminded of our dual task in this world. We are obligated to elevate our bread and all of our material needs. We are also required to use our light for the proper purpose. As we study the Shulchan and the Menorah and contemplate their inner meaning, we realize the significance of the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar, being situated between them. The Mizbeach symbolizes closeness to Hashem, as the word korban stems from the root of the word for closeness, kuf resh ves. We are supposed to be involved in this world, but only with the understanding that we enjoy it in a way that brings us closer to Hashem. The Shulchan can be pursued, but only if it stands next to the Mizbeach. next to the altar. Similarly, we are supposed to use our intellectual capability to their fullest in order to draw us closer to Hashem. Our Menorah, the candelabrum, must be guided by our mizbeach, or altar. We have two unique opportunities during the year to reaffirm our commitment to the Shulchan and the Menorah. Purim is celebrated around the table with physical enjoyment, whereas Hanukkah focuses on light and spiritual pursuits and providing a light to the nations. Now Moshe erects the mishkan miraculously. The mishkan was made of inanimate objects, whether gold, silver or wood. All of it was inanimate. The structure of the mishkan required atzei shitim omdim, planks of cedar standing upright. Material alone does not make the mishkan unless it is infused with some sort of inner life force. It is a divine spirit that permeates it, infused by a person who has the life-giving energy which is the hallmark of a great person. Klal Yisrael could make the pieces and craft them to precision, but they could not infuse it with divine life. Moshe was the one person who possibly could infuse it with divine life, and even he could do so only with the Kodesh Baruch Hu's help. No person can give life. It is ultimately Hashem that gives life. But it does require the medium of a person who is worthy of infusing that life, and that was Moshe Rabbeinu. This is perhaps a lesson for all of us who are engaged in one way or another in creating spiritual enterprises, whether it is a shul or a yeshiva or any other type of Beis Hashem, house of God. Yes, we must have all the material pieces, personnel, and so on, but all of that remains dead weight without a person who has something of a divine spirit to infuse it with that spirit of life. The history of Klal Yisrael's successes, even in our days, was due to much effort and much material pieces falling into place. But no money, no system, no buildings or anything else of that nature succeeded in creating a mokum of Kedusha, a place of holiness that inspires others, unless life was breathed into it by a person of spirit. Now finally, Pesach. Pesach or Passover was only the initial part of the liberation process for the Jewish nation, and thus cannot be separated from the festival of Shavuos, where the physical freedom of the Jews was channeled into spiritual service of God, symbolized by Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. The verse states the Ten Commandments were chorus, carved into the tablets, but the sages tell us not to read chorus, but rather cherus. We can also read cherus, meaning free. We are only truly free when we know how to conduct ourselves in a way which is conducive to our spiritual enlightenment and progress. We only reach this stage when we receive the Torah at Sinai. Now, a Pesach cleaning tip to finish. There is an halachic ruling that any food which is nifsal me'achilas kelev, meaning a dog wouldn't eat it, is not considered food at all, and is thus certainly not considered chometz. 11. This applies to any food residue which comes into contact with bleach or almost any other modern cleaning chemical product. We can rely on this when cleaning counters and shelves, etc., which won't come into direct contact with Pesach food, as they will be covered. And that's the end of Parsha Vayakhel Pekudei. And next week we start a brand new book of the Torah, the book of Vayikra. And looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for listening or watching. Kol Tuv. Shalom.